Hey, I'm Saskia, and I'm a college student. I live with my roomie Ellie. She's fun at times, but other times, she can be super serious. Also, more often than not, it feels like she's completely attached to her annoying boyfriend Brett, as I'm always walking in on them kissing. So gross. But thanks to them, I got the chance to be around my crush. Then I myself somehow ruined it. I love rom-coms. Really love them. So naturally, when this amazing-looking rom-com hit the cinemas, I wanted to see it on its release date. At first, Ellie agreed to go and see it with me, but then the day before, she canceled on me. This made me mad, as she'd promised me. So I trailed after her around our house and kept on nagging her about it while she was trying to cook, study, and talk on the phone to Brett. All of my nagging paid off, as she eventually caved and agreed to come, but only on the condition that Brett came too. This sucked, as I didn't like him to be there at all. Besides, I didn't want to play gooseberry to these two. I mean, talk about awkward. I moaned at her for ruining our girls' night and told her she was a lame friend. Then she suggested that Brett's friend Trent could come too. Trent would go! He's my pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I mean, cuteness level? 10 out of 10. I have already seen him a couple of times at school and secretly admired him, though she didn't know about it. I was so excited about meeting Trent properly, so I spent ages doing my hair and makeup, and I put on this really cute dress. Probably that was the longest duration I spent in front of the mirror in my entire life. I wanted to impress him. Then maybe he could become my boyfriend, and I'd have my very own happy ending. Ellie and I showed up at the theater before them. Time ticked by, and I remained glued to the entrance. When it comes to plans, I'm always the punctual one. I hate it when someone's late. I mean, it's not hard to be on time. Jeez, they were almost half an hour late. What's wrong with them? I was mad. Super mad. Anger built up inside of me. I'm surprised steam didn't come out of my ears. But then, suddenly, Brett and Trent walked through the entrance. And just a second, all my anger vanished. Trent was wearing a navy shirt, my fave color, and looking so damn hot. My anger instantly melted, and I found myself smiling over at him. He said, "Sorry we're late. It's the traffic, and when we were coming." Before he could complete, I blurted out, "It's okay." Ellie gave me a strange look and was about to say something, but I hit her arm to stop her. She knew how much lateness bugged me. The boys mentioned they were hungry, so we went to get food. I was so hungry, my stomach was gurgling, but I didn't want to look greedy in front of him. The two lovebirds walked holding hands in front, leaving us behind. We walked in silence. I wanted to talk and not miss a chance to stare at his face, but as I didn't want to appear desperate, I chose to keep quiet. Just then, my stomach gurgled really loudly, but he acted like he hadn't heard. He was so sweet. Everyone else ordered puffs. But have you tried eating those without spreading them all over your lip? I was trying to impress Trent, not scare him off. So, to stay on the safe side, I ordered the potato bhaji, and I only ate 2, although I'm a big foodie. During the movie, Ellie and Brett occupied the corner seats, so I sat next to Mr. Cutie. The movie started, and they got into action. I was not eavesdropping, but I couldn't help but hear some weird noises coming from them. Trent smiled at me. I guess he heard them too. OMG. His dimples! You know, I have a thing for dimples. He looked even more handsome in the dim lights. Whenever a romantic scene came, I pictured me and him. I knew I had to slow down, but I couldn't. Everything was going well when suddenly, a very bad smell crawled into my nose. It was not bad, but disgusting. Worse than a rotten egg. Yeah, it was the smell of a fart. Our row had only 4 seats, and it was evident that someone among us had done the crime. It was so embarrassing. Worse still, my eyes teared up due to the stench. We all passed weird glances between us. Then Ellie said, "Be frank. Who dealt it?" I replied, "Accept it, Yar. I know who it is." She replied, "What is the proof?" And I said, "You're always doing it at home." She blushed bright red, and Brett laughed out loud. I never miss a chance to embarrass her. Little did I know, I had to pay such a huge price for this. She grinned at me, then said, "Well, everyone knows who ate potatoes today." Talk about embarrassing! Everyone, except me, obviously, laughed. And out of them all, Trent was the one who laughed the most. For the rest of the movie, Trent would look at me and laugh. Even more annoyingly, the fart culprit remained a mystery. Then, when we were on the way out of the cinema, I dropped my lipstick on the floor and had to bend down to pick it up. A big fart came out from me! Everyone in this world could hear it. And yep, including Trent, who was standing right behind me. They all laughed, and I just stood there, mortified. Worse still, they must think that the previous fart belonged to me too. But no! My fart didn't even have a smell. It was just like fresh air, and could be totally normal with no realization if it didn't sound like a bomb. That was the most awkward moment in my entire life. There was no way Trent would like me now. This sucked. As soon as I got home, I rushed up to my room and stayed there. I didn't want to see Ellie all smug. I didn't want to see anyone ever again. That night, I just lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling, concerned about how my life would go. Due to a nonsense fart, my crush had laughed at me, probably now hated me, and thought I was a loser. Now we could never be in a relationship together, or marry and have kids. Talk about a life ruiner! I'd end up some crazy cat lady, or even worse, stuck with this weird nerd at my college called Carson, the only person in this world who could ever like me. A message suddenly came. My heart flipped. It was from Trent. "Is your stomach okay?" This was so embarrassing. Would I ever live it down? "It's not funny, smiley face," I messaged back. Then, to my surprise, he replied with, "I just want to ask you out tomorrow. I have 2 tickets. It's a horror movie." Oh, damn. Not the cinema again. Was this a joke? Was he trying to humiliate me again? The cinema staff would remember my face, as I was the girl who created a bomb fart that everyone in the vicinity heard. I made up some excuse about having to study. This sucked, as it was a horror movie, and I know I just missed the chance to be a little weak cat in his arms. But what else could I do? To back up my story, I spent Saturday in the library. Yes, I know, talk about lame. This was so awful. It was a sunny day, but for sure, I had to pretend like I was super busy on something, in case him and my roomie ever talked and found out that I was just wrapping myself in my blanket feeling ashamed about my 2 farts. I sat down and flicked through a book, when Carson came and sat next to me. Yep, the nerd. He smiled at me, and I didn't want to be rude, so I smiled back. Suddenly, I heard a voice. "So here you are. Crazy busy with another guy?" It was Mr. Cutie himself, Trent. Turns out, he'd shown up with lunch and a coffee for me. I tried explaining to him that I didn't even know Carson that well. That's when Carson smiled over at me, grabbed my hand, then said, "We spend every Saturday together at the library, and now we're official." I sat there, frozen. This was madness. By the time I realized Carson was still holding my hand and pulled it away, it was too late, as Trent had stormed off. Then, messages continuously popped up from my friends. "You're with Carson? You guys are dating in the library? Seriously? I saw your picture." Carson the nerd posted it on Instagram with, "Studying on Saturday with my love." I checked my social media. Yep, Carson had just tagged me in a post with him. Now, as well as being the fart girl, Trent now also thinks I'm some sort of lying floozy. This is so not the case. I just want my happily ever after with him. Now what am I meant to do? Hey, it's Saskia, back again to tell you all about my not-so-successful love life. It started during a movie trip with my roomie Ellie, her annoying boyfriend Brett, and his dreamy friend Trent. Swoon! During the movie, someone let out a huge fart, and I ended up being blamed for it. Then, to make it worse, on leaving the cinema, I actually did fart in front of everyone. I thought I'd blown it with Trent, literally. So when he asked me out on a date, my embarrassment made me turn him down, and instead, I went to the library to study. Only while I was there, Trent appeared and saw me with my classmate Carson and came to the wrong conclusion. Worse still, now Carson seems to like me. Now my life's a mess, and Trent isn't talking to me. So, after an evening spent watching way too many cheesy romance films and consuming far too much ice cream, I realized that my self-pity parade wasn't the answer. I mean, talk about tragedy. I just couldn't hide away. No, I had to hold my head up high and be as resilient as the characters from my favorite rom-coms were. So, the next day at college, I forced myself to look nice and smile as I trailed after Ellie and Brett. Ugh. Seeing as Brett was friends with Trent, I thought it'd be easier to get Brett to explain to him that nothing was going on between me and Carson. Why don't you tell him yourself? Brett rolled his eyes. No, I wasn't going to tell him that. I was too nervous to meet him. Why do I have to explain to him directly? You just act like I care about him. I blurted out to cover my embarrassment. And at that very moment, Trent appeared from nowhere. His uncomfortable face made it known that he'd heard everything. Then Brett smirked and said, "Looks like I don't have to explain about Carson to Trent anymore. But would you like me to explain with him about your big loud fart the other night?" I stood there, mortified. I knew Brett was a jerk, but did he really have to bring the fart situation up now? Now everyone was looking at me like I was a comedian. For the rest of the day, I tried to keep a low-key. This was all Carson's fault. Why did he have to act like we were a couple? I needed to find him and tell him straight out that he was delusional. Only I couldn't find him in class, the library, or anywhere else in college. So following Ellie's suggestion, at my lunchtime in the canteen, I messaged him saying, "Why did you say all that stuff?" After a while, he answered, "I want to impress you, 'cause I think that I kinda like you." He's gotta be kidding me! I spoke out loud at the same time as I stood up from my seat, without recalling that I was in the middle of a busy canteen. Oh, great. Now people looked at me like a weird person. Again, just in one day. I wanted to yell out, "Nope! People, you've all got the wrong idea. The weird person here isn't me. It's the guy texting me right now." But getting back to reality, I sat down and mumbled sorry to everyone for my extra behavior. For real, if you like me, you should pursue me in the right way. Don't do such silly things like that. I wrote back. I thought that would be the end of it. Oh, how wrong I was. The messages from Carson didn't end. Instead, he bombarded me with questions, such as what's my favorite hobby, my favorite color, food I liked. At first, I ignored the messages, but then he messaged me. "I just want to be friends and learn more about you, as I truly care about you. If you want me to stop, then I will." Okay, so I felt kinda bad for him. As needy as Carson could be, he was a nice enough guy who didn't deserve the silent treatment, so I began messaging him back. And with Trent, things between us were terrible anyway. He basically acted like I didn't exist, and whenever he hung out with the others and I, he just scrolled through his phone so he didn't have to make eye contact with me. Talk about annoying! One day, tension between us even worsened. That time, I was sitting on the college lawn with the three of them, Trent, Brett, and Ellie, and Trent was ignoring me as usual, when out of nowhere, a girl appeared and angrily approached us. We all looked at Brett, as, let's face it, out of all of us, he was the most likely to mess up. But then the girl yelled at me. "You're a bad person, Saskia. You stole Carson from me." She also added that she used to be Carson's girlfriend, but not anymore because Carson liked me. Ugh! What was going on? I didn't like Carson, I said, but she was assertive that her Carson was too good to reject. Except that I had a boyfriend already. Before I had a chance to think up a reply, Brett said, "Besides Carson, who else can like Saskia?" Right. Brett and his rude comment again, which made me want to kick him straight to the ground. I snapped back at him. "For your information, there's a very handsome guy chasing me, and maybe someday I will accept him." As I finished speaking, I was startled as Trent suddenly stormed off. OMG! That was so terrible. Now Trent thought I had someone else. Ugh! Why was my life such a mess? Then, to make it worse, about 1 week later, I walked out of class to see this pretty girl in the hall called Amy. She was flirting with Trent. Right in front of my eyes! Jeez! Why were there so many people interfering with our love story? Ellie and Brett, who had no sensitivity about my feelings, adding the mess Carson and his ex left to me, now a girl wanted to steal Trent? Clearly, if it wasn't me, no one could help us. I needed to talk to Trent, without actually talking to him, as I sucked at doing this. So, taking inspiration from the genre of love, I decided to write a soppy letter. Yeah, you may say it's old-fashioned, but I say it's romantic. I was so absorbed in thought while I was walking to the lecture that I bumped into someone and dropped the letter in my hand. It was Amy, and she helped me pick it up. She saw Trent's name, and even a heart sign beside it. Cringe. Then she looked at me for a moment and said, I feel sorry for you, but I have to tell you that Trent has a girlfriend. What? I'm sure my heart actually sunk. Amy told me that she'd asked Trent out, and he'd turned her down because he liked someone else. I pictured Trent being all lovey-dovey with some other girl, and it made me feel so jealous. Naturally, I couldn't face my next lecture, so I skipped it and went home, with my undelivered love letter stuffed to the bottom of my bag. Later on that night, I went for a long walk to clear my head. That's when Carson messaged me. Why didn't you tell me that you have someone else? Why choose him? Why not me? Clearly, Carson's crazy ex had told him what I said. I wasn't in the mood for his messages right now. He'd caused me enough trouble. So I sent a clear message about my feelings. I lied. There's no other guy. Actually, I have one-sided feelings for Trent. I'm sorry. Carson didn't reply to me after that. Then Ellie called me, insisting I come to a party. Brett even yelled on the phone that I had to come because they were too wasted. It wasn't like I had anything better to do, so I searched for the location Ellie sent me. As soon as I was at the front of the house, I felt so confused, as the house seemed too quiet for a party. Had Ellie sent me the wrong location? I mean, she didn't sound super drunk. Then the door opened. OMG. It was Trent! He walked out and asked me to follow him inside. The lighting was very dim, and no one was here. He took me to the middle of the kitchen, where I saw a small disco ball hang in the room's ceiling. Suddenly, he took my hand in his hand, looked straight at me, and said the 3 words I never expected to hear from him. I like you. OMG. Did Trent really like me, or was I being pranked right now? My hand was trembling, and my silly thoughts even made me look around to see if anyone was hiding. But then he grinned at me. I guess you're stunned. But you should prepare for my next confession. He told me that Carson was his childhood friend. Carson teased Trent in the library because he knew Trent's feelings for me, but he didn't expect it to backfire. And to apologize, Carson offered to help Trent pursue me. First, Trent could pretend to be Carson to text and learn more about me. Then, to escalate the process, Carson asked a friend to pretend to be his ex, forcing me to speak out my feelings. Trent was so despaired by my response, so he decided to impersonate Carson one last time and sent that message to me, where he found out that I liked him. Immediately, Trent asked Ellie and Brett to help him out. Wow, this plan was definitely not normal, but the way he nervously admitted everything to me somehow made my heart flutter. I nodded my head as a sign of me forgiving him. Thanks, he smiled back. I saw his face in the middle of the dim flickering lights approaching mine slowly. This was it. Our first kiss was going to happen. But then I heard a great big fart. What? Brett, Ellie, and Carson appeared in the front door. They were all laughing hysterically, and Brett was holding a fart machine and said, "Well, it's about time you two got together." Trent shooed them off. Then smiling, he said to me, "Let's try that again, shall we?" I nodded and we kissed. Talk about butterflies! And that's how I ended up with the cutest boyfriend ever. Oh, wait, hang on a minute. My story hasn't finished yet, because that night when I returned home, I received a message from Trent telling me that he was the one who made the first fart in the cinema that time. He said sorry to me, but he was too embarrassed to admit it right away. Really? This was a shocker, but also hilarious. As if our story could become so complicated just because of a very simple thing. Moreover, if that day both me and Trent farted at the cinema, wasn't that our destiny?
Hi, I'm Diane, and I'm 20 years old. I fell in love on the first day of college. I'm not even joking. I'd promised my mom I'd focus on my studies and wouldn't fall for any boys. But one look at Brett, and I broke that promise immediately. We had an instant connection, and pretty soon we were spending every waking moment together. I can't help but think that if I hadn't met him, maybe I'd never have found out the dark secret my mom and aunt had been hiding from me my whole life. You see, my mom raised me alone, and I had no idea who my dad was. Let's just say it seemed like my mom got around, so she really didn't want me to get into the same kind of situation as her. I decided to keep Brett a secret. She didn't need to know, right? When I went home for Christmas vacation, I missed Brett so much, but I couldn't let my mom know about him. So I'd wait until she went to bed before calling him. One night, she caught me though. She must have gone to the bathroom, and suddenly I heard footsteps. She was standing right there. I didn't know how much she heard, but I was so embarrassed. I thought she'd grab the phone from me and tell me off, but instead, she just walked back to bed. It was so weird. In the morning, she was sitting at the kitchen table grinning and said, "Well, who is he then? Invite him over. Don't be shy." I couldn't believe it. I thought she'd freak out, but instead she wanted to meet him. She suggested we invited him over for dinner, as my aunt was also coming over that night. My mom and my aunt were like best friends and had basically raised me together, so I was excited for her to meet Brett too. He took the bus that afternoon, as he was desperate to see me, and my mom said he could stay in the spare room. As soon as my mom saw Brett, she grinned at me and whispered how handsome he was. Then we sat down to dinner and started chatting. My mom had so many questions for him, and it was a bit awkward. She wouldn't shut up, and it made her seem so nosy. She asked where he'd grown up, and what his mom and dad did, and even asked for their names and stuff. Meanwhile, my aunt just sat there quietly, and then at one point she got up from the table and went out into the garden. My mom ran after her, and Brett looked at me worried. I had no idea what was wrong. 10 minutes later, my mom came in and her expression had totally changed. She went from being warm and friendly to totally strict and cold. She looked at both Brett and I and said she decided I was far too young to have a boyfriend staying over, and then asked Brett to leave. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was 20 years old. She was being so rude. So I said to her, "Mom, why? Please, can he just stay?" I was almost begging her, but she looked so serious and firm, and I knew she wasn't going to change her mind. Brett was even more shocked than me. I mean, it had been my mom who'd invited him in the first place, and now there she was, shooing him away. He quickly grabbed his stuff and ordered a taxi. I was so upset I didn't even say bye to him. I just burst into tears and felt so angry at my mom. Right after Brett left, I ran upstairs and locked myself in my room, and my mom stood on the other side begging to speak to me. She said there was something she needed to tell me. I refused to come out and instead sat on the floor on the other side of the door. I could hear my mom crying and knew this was serious. She said the reason she didn't want Brett to stay was because he was actually my half-brother. No, I didn't understand. I asked if my dad was also Brett's dad, and then I got angry. I thought my mom hadn't known who my dad was. I opened the door and I was about to start shouting at her when she told me what was really going on. I'd been adopted. Well, actually, I'd been kidnapped by my aunt when I was born. It's a long, shocking story, but basically my biological parents were this rich couple, but they were struggling to get pregnant. My biological mom had a best friend called Ashley, who she told everything to, but Ashley secretly had a crush on my dad. She seduced my dad until one night they slept together, and Ashley ended up getting pregnant. My dad was so happy and promised Ashley he'd help raise the baby, but that he couldn't divorce my mom. This made Ashley angry. She wanted my dad all to herself and wanted their kid to become the heir to his company. At the same time, my biological mom fell pregnant with me, and when my dad found out, he quickly forgot about Ashley and tried to forget about the mistake he'd made that one night. This, of course, made Ashley even more angry, but she still pretended to be friends with my mom. When my mom went into labor with me, my dad was away on a business trip, and Ashley paid someone to sneak into the hospital and kidnap me. That person turned out to be my aunt. She did it because she was desperate for cash, so she snuck in, dressed up as a nurse, and in the middle of the night stole me away. But she wasn't cold-blooded enough to just throw me away or leave me at an orphanage. So she took me to her sister's place and told her that she'd found me abandoned on the street. Her sister, who had never wanted to get married but had always wanted to be a mom, was so happy and decided to raise me. But then a few days later, it was all over the news, a missing baby. There was an exact description of what I'd been wearing, and even a photo of me just after I'd been born. There was no denying that I was the missing baby. My new mom confronted my aunt about it and found out the truth. My aunt said there was no way they could return me as my aunt had already spent all the money she'd been paid to cover some debts. And she didn't want to go to prison, so they decided to raise me as if I really was their own. That secret would still have been hidden from me if I hadn't brought Brett home. My mom was so shocked that I'd brought my dad and Ashley's son into her home and introduced him to her as my boyfriend. As my mom told me all of this, I just sat there frozen. This was absolutely unbelievable. I felt sick. They'd lied to me all these years, and even worse, my boyfriend was actually my half-brother. My whole life was one big mess. "I hate you, Mom, and I hate you too," I said to my aunt. "You helped that evil monster Ashley get what she wanted, and now you've ruined my life and taken away my family." My mom reached out to hug me, but I didn't want her near me. We both just sat there crying. She tried to calm me down and get me to relax. Then she sighed and said, "I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. Your whole life I've been trying to make it up to you. I thought my love for you would be enough. As for Ashley, well, I heard she didn't get what she wanted in the end." "Wait, why? I don't understand." "But she successfully kidnapped me, right?" I wiped my tears and looked at her. "Yes, sweetie, but her main goal was to become your dad's wife. But that obviously didn't happen." Then she continued, "After my aunt had kidnapped me, Ashley had given birth to Brett, and was so happy thinking that my parents no longer had a baby, and that my dad would now leave my mom and go live with her. But that's not what happened. Yes, their dear daughter was taken away, but my dad still stayed with my mom and loved her even more. My dad didn't get together with Ashley, but apparently my dad had still been helping raise Brett until now. There's definitely no bad blood between them because I've heard Brett talk about his dad quite a lot. Now there was only one thing for it. I had to find my biological parents and find out the rest of the story. They deserved to know I was alive. But now, what would I do about Brett? I'd have to break up with him somehow. Hi, I'm Ella, and I'm 17. Have you ever been brave enough to change the things that you were too familiar with? If yes, did you encounter any difficulties? Well, for me, yeah. It's more than just changes. And this is the story of what happened to me last summer. And it's really crazy, so brace yourself. So, I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. When I say small, I mean it. It only had a population of 85 people. There was just one gas station, 2 small parks, 1 grocery store, and oh yeah, only 1 school. Including me, there were only 7 kids in my grade. That's right, 7 people. And my grade was one of the biggest ones. From when I was 5 years old to the time I was 15, I spent most of my time with the same 6 classmates. After being with them for many years, most of them really started to get on my nerves. Well, apart from Rosie. Rosie and I became BFFs in 3rd grade. Some other kids were teasing me about my red hair and told me that I looked like a tomato. But then Rosie appeared by my side and told them to back off. From then on, we became best friends and were pretty much inseparable. My life was good. I felt safe in my little town where everyone knew each other. In a city, there were way too many people for my liking, and too much pressure to be popular, and I didn't want that. I knew a small town life was the life for me. But then, when I was 16, everything changed. On one Saturday afternoon, I was at Rosie's house watching a movie when my parents called me and told me to come home at once. I thought this was kinda weird because my parents didn't usually call me to come home until it was late at night. And right now it was only 4:30 p.m. What did they need me to come home for? I arrived home to find Jake, my brother, crying. I bursted out loud. "What happened? What was going on?" Seeing me totally in shock, my dad said, "Ella, we have some news." What news was bad enough to make my brother, who wasn't the emotional type, cry. Did someone have a serious illness? Had someone died? Oh no. Had my beloved dog Sally died? Then he said, Ella, I've been offered a job in New York City. What? I yelled. And he's taking it. This is an amazing opportunity for us all. And moving out of this town will be good for us. It'll be a great adventure, Mom said. New York? The biggest city in the entire country? No, I couldn't move there. I didn't want a new adventure. I was perfectly happy where we lived now, and I didn't want to leave. But however much I sulked, shouted, or pleaded with my parents to stay, their minds were made up, and we were moving. Telling Rosie was horrible. She got so upset, and I felt awful about it. I didn't want to leave her, but what choice did I have? I spent my last day in town with her. We ate pizza, watched our favorite movies, played our favorite video games, and things like that. When it was time for me to leave, I gave her my unicorn plushie to remember me by. Then we cried into each other's arms and we promised to text each other every single day. So, I left the safety of my little town and moved to the city. Our new house was much smaller than my old one, but at least we could keep Sally. On my first day of school, I was terrified. There were so many people and I didn't know where I was meant to go or what I was meant to do. Luckily, the kids there were actually really nice. This one girl showed me where my locker was, and some other kids let me sit with them at lunchtime. After only a few weeks of living in New York, I started to find my bearings. I even figured out how to navigate the underground. I made some pretty great friends, but this didn't change the fact that Rosie was still my BFF. I texted her every day, and sometimes we spent hours on the phone with each other. A month of city life passed, and I got talking to this boy in my English class called Alex. He had the most amazing blonde hair, and his eyes, they were blue like the sky and the ocean, and a swimming pool, and yeah, if you couldn't tell, I really liked Alex. Not only was he unbelievably cute, but he was also kind and funny. We bonded over our love of video games and dogs, and soon became pretty close. Then one day, he invited me over to his apartment to hang out. Then over a giant pizza and a movie, he told me he liked me and asked me to be his girlfriend. I instantly said yes! I was so excited and couldn't wait to tell Rosie, but she didn't seem all that thrilled about it. For a few months, everything was perfect for me. School life was great, and I had some awesome friends and an amazing boyfriend. Sadly, though, Rosie and I grew further apart. I barely had time to talk to her hours on the phone every night. It was like our timeline became different. She always called when I was busy, and when I texted her back, she wasn't there. I know that she always cared about me, but my busy life just carried me away. I told myself this was okay as things change. People get different friends. Though not as often as before, Rosie and I still chatted whenever we had a chance. One time I told her that I would be going out with Alex at a fancy restaurant the next day. Anytime I mentioned Alex, she seemed not cool with it. But that time she expressed her excitement and asked me a lot about our date. That made me feel so good. When the day came, I went to meet Alex at the restaurant that he had booked for us. I entered and waited for about 20 minutes for him to show. I began to get impatient and asked a waiter if he'd seen a boy with blonde hair and blue eyes come in at all. The waiter told me he had, but he'd left with a tall girl with long brown hair and brown eyes. What? Who was the girl he left with, and why? I thought of everyone I knew who fit that description. I couldn't think of anyone, except for Rosie. But she lived in Pennsylvania. Why would she be here talking to my boyfriend? I decided to call Alex, but he sounded muffled, and I heard a girl talking in the background. It sounded like they were arguing, and then the call ended. This was so weird. What happened? I had no idea what was going on, so I headed home. On my way, I felt like someone was following me. And then I realized that there was one car driving very slowly after me. When I tried stopping, it also stopped. Oh my God. Was it having anything to do with me? I felt terrified and started to run as quick as I could until I reached my house. I turned back and saw that car parked outside my house. I was shaking as I tried to open the door. And as I did, Sally zoomed past me and ran toward the car. I had only seen her act that way whenever Alex came over. She really liked Alex. Wait, Alex? That was it. Alex was in that car. Was it a prank? I ran over to see what the heck was going on. There, sitting in the driver's seat, was Rosie. And to my complete shock, Alex was tied up in the back seat. "Rosie!" I screamed. "What are you doing here in New York with my boyfriend?" Alex screamed, "Help! She told me you were waiting for me in her car, then she kidnapped me." Rosie quickly turned around and looked me right in the face. Hi, Ella. "What are you doing with my boyfriend?" "He's not a good guy for you, Ella. I need you to break up with him now, or else I will drive away so you can never find him ever." "Are you crazy? We will not break up just because you demand me to do that. Now let him go." I walked around to the passenger door to get Alex, but then the car started moving, fast. I ran after the car, but I was too slow. But Sally ran after it too, and she didn't stop. She almost got hit by cars as she ran through traffic until she was out of sight. I was so scared. I was about to call the cops when I saw a police car zoom past me. How did they know about this already? Who called 911? I looked back and saw my mom standing outside with the phone waving at me nervously. She had seen all the commotion and called the cops. Thanks, Mom. There was nothing I could do now except wait. It was awful. I was so anxious. About an hour later, a cop car pulled up to our house. The cop stepped out and opened the back door, and out came Sally. I ran up to the police car and hugged Sally. She was safe. But what about Alex? The officer told me that they'd chased the car for almost 2 miles until they cornered it on a dead-end street. He said that Rosie was very fierce and tried resisting arrest, but they'd taken her to the station. To my relief, Alex was fine, and they dropped him back home. Phew. I just didn't understand it. Rosie was my best friend. Why would she try to seriously harm my boyfriend? I later found out that Rosie was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. It's a disorder that causes people to go through extreme mood swings and do things that are out of character and crazy. Rosie had a lot going on. As well as me not being around anymore, her dad had moved out. I didn't know this as she hadn't told me. Back then, I wasn't talking all that much to her, but I'd never expected that the separation Rosie felt was too much for her and could lead her to bipolar disorder. I was her only one at that time, so she wanted her to be my only one too. But Alex appeared and made her feel insecure and seriously jealous. It is fortunate there are no serious consequences. I really hope Rosie gets the proper treatment for her disorder. We might not be as close anymore, but in my eyes, she'll always be the girl who was there for me when I was being teased, and I will always regret that I wasn't there to listen to her more when she needed me. I still feel sad about it all, but I'm trying to see the positives. Things with Alex are going great, and I'm happy here. It turns out city life is for me after all. Whether it's in friendship or love, people still need their own space. And sometimes, as sad as it is, people do grow apart. This happens in life. Being overjealous doesn't help mend things. It just pushes the other person further away.
I was born into a pretty poor family, so money was always on my mind. As I grew up, all I wanted was to have money, and I couldn't wait until I was old enough to start making some of my own. I especially couldn't stand the way people took advantage of others just to get some quick cash. And yet, it wasn't long before I almost became like one of those gold diggers that I hated so much. I'm Jolie, and I'm 20 years old. You might be wondering why I hate gold diggers. Well, who doesn't? But for starters, my mom was one. Yup, that's right. She ditched me and my dad to marry some rich guy when I was just 5 years old. I can't even recall her face, but I still remember that day like it was just yesterday. I was screaming and crying and begging her not to leave, but she didn't even look back. Ever since, it's just been me and my dad. Obviously, my dad worked really hard to make enough money to raise me alone, but we were still poor. He worked on construction sites, and the hours were long, so it wasn't long before his health started to go downhill. A lot of his money went towards medical bills, and so we made do with whatever was left. This made me hate my mom so much. She was the most selfish person in the world to me. Dad still encouraged me to focus on my education though, so I ended up going to college to further study Chinese, which I've always been fond for. But after 1 year, we couldn't afford it anymore, so I decided to quit and find a job to help my dad out. At first, I worked as a waitress, but I was pretty smart, and my Chinese was good, so eventually, I got another job as an interpreter in a big company, where I met John. He was the CEO, and also the person who would change my entire life. So there I was working 2 jobs, and even though I was exhausted, I was happy. I was making enough money to look after my dad, and also had enough left to buy gifts for my boyfriend. Yep, that's right. I had a boyfriend called Scott, and we'd been dating for 2 years. I felt like the luckiest girl in the world, because he was drop-dead gorgeous. I loved buying him stuff, because it made him so happy. Finally, my life was turning around for the better. But then everything changed in the blink of an eye. I caught Scott cheating on me with some woman the same age as his mom. I couldn't believe it. He used his good looks to date older women, just so he could get their money. He was as bad as my mom. Nothing but a gold digger. Though, little did I know, I was about to follow in their footsteps. It all started the day I caught him cheating. I was so upset and miserable. I'd bumped into them in the mall where I'd seen them holding hands and kissing, and all I wanted was to get as far away as possible from there. I ran out onto the street, and then I just collapsed onto the sidewalk and started crying my eyes out. Suddenly, I heard someone say, "Jolie, what are you doing here?" I looked up, and John, the CEO, was standing there. I tried to stop the tears, but I couldn't. I couldn't even speak. He helped me up and told me to get in the car and go somewhere so I could calm myself down. Then we ended up in a bar, and I drank a lot. I couldn't stop myself from telling him about what Scott had done. John comforted me, and then, the next moment, I woke up and John was lying next to me. I was about to freak out, but John looked at me and smiled and said that if I hung out with him from time to time, like this, then he'd subsidize everything for me so that I could go back to college and pay my tuition. I was shocked. He said it had to be our secret so that his wife didn't find out. I was about to say no way, but the thought of being able to finish my studies and graduate made me consider it again. And after all, John was being so sweet, and me and my dad could really use that extra money. So the next moment, I found myself nodding my head, and the rest was history. I had officially become John's secret lover, aka a gold digger. And let me tell you, my life got so much easier. I went back to college and had more time to enjoy life. But at the same time, I couldn't shake off the guilt, especially when I thought about John's wife. I'd never met her before, but I knew from working at John's company that her name was Doris, and that she was the perfect wife. I even found out that they didn't have kids because Doris was infertile after some accident. This made me feel so bad. How had I let myself become a mistress like this? It wasn't right. But still, I couldn't just end things with John. You see, I'd actually started to fall in love with him. Yes, you can say I was a gold digger, but I also had real feelings for him. And so did he. He took care of me, and I was happy with him. It was only natural that I'd start loving him. And so, even though I knew what we were doing was wrong, I couldn't stop it. Then one day, I was walking to the bus stop when a random man approached me and said that Doris wanted to meet me. Oh my God, Doris knew about me? I felt so sick suddenly. He said she wanted to meet me right away, and so I followed him to a nearby cafe where she was waiting. As soon as I saw her, my jaw dropped. I knew her. It was the woman Scott had cheated on me with. No way! I couldn't believe my eyes. When she saw me, she looked shocked. But then she said, well, looks like we're destined to meet. Okay, I'll get straight to the point. You need to back away from my husband. What? Clearly, Doris wasn't the perfect wife everyone made her out to be. I said to her, "You do know you're no better than me, right? I wonder what John would say if he knew you were having an affair too." She was furious. She started shouting at me, saying John would never leave her and that she would not let me steal him away, especially his money, and that it all belonged to her. Then she stormed off. Surprise, surprise, she was just with John for his money. She was even worse than me. At least I loved him. After that meeting, the war between Doris and I officially began. She started to rub in my face that she was his wife, and I wasn't. Every day, she'd turn up at the office with his lunch and kiss him in front of me. Honestly, it made me sick. No, really, like literally sick. But no luck for her, the universe works in funny ways. And guess what? I was pregnant. And this was one thing I could give John that Doris couldn't. I was so happy. I called John right away. He was over the moon and promised to take care of me and the kid. He started spending more time with me after that. But one day when we were together, Doris called and said she was sick. I couldn't stand her interrupting our special time like this, so I pretended to have stomach pains, and he immediately drove me to the hospital and asked their maid to go take care of Doris. Ha! I'd won this time. But then something shocking happened. Doris appeared in front of my house. When would she give up? I walked towards her and asked, "What else do you want now?" She was about to say something, but suddenly, my dad came out from the house and said, "Jolie, what are you doing?" So both me and Doris turned back and, well, that's when things got crazier. "Doris?" My dad shouted in surprise. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Then Doris said, "Thomas?" How did they know each other? Well, the next thing, my dad was screaming, "Get away from her! She's not your daughter anymore!" I froze. Doris was my mom? Before I could even say anything, she ran to her car and drove off. I didn't even want to see my dad. I just wanted to be alone. That night, I lay awake all night thinking about it all. I'd been competing with my mom? This was so wrong. What was I going to do? I loved John, and I wanted to have his baby so badly, but he was my mom's husband. And then, all those old feelings of abandonment came flooding back. My mom had left us, and now she was hurting John. She just took advantage of our love and only cared about money. She didn't care about any of us. Why could she be so selfish? I couldn't stop crying. Everything was such a mess. Eventually, I fell asleep, and when I woke up, I knew what I had to do. Even though she was my mom, she needed to learn a lesson once and for all. I called John and asked if we could meet at our favorite cafe. I was so nervous, but I told him everything. How she'd cheated on him, and then how she was my mom. I even showed him some photos of her with Scott that I'd taken outside Scott's house. John was so shocked. He just stared at me, not saying anything. He looked completely heartbroken, and I wanted to hug and comfort him, but I knew I couldn't do that anymore. In the end, John divorced Doris and kicked her out of the house, leaving her with nothing. And then, you won't believe it, he proposed to me. What did I say? Well, I'm still deciding. Becoming the wife of my mom's ex-husband just feels a bit strange. My mom has suffered a lot already. I'm not sure I want to make her even more miserable. But let's see. All I know is that I'm going to give birth soon and raise this baby in the best way I can. I'm definitely going to be a better mom than my mom was. That's for sure. Hi, it's Amelia again. In the second part of my story, Jude started working in the restaurant, and at first, it was a total disaster. He made a mess everywhere he set foot in. He was driving me totally crazy. But then things started to change. Turns out, he was a pretty talented chef that could help me with housework. And at work, he was becoming quite popular. One day, he got a date with a pretty girl, which annoyed me so much. But then I found him in the park playing with stray cats instead of going on that date. Honestly, that made me feel so happy. Has he really changed? To find out, let's see what happened next. At the restaurant, there was a new waiter called Oliver, who was a year younger than me. Our manager asked me to look after him and show him the ropes. To be honest, I was really impressed with Oliver, as he was such a sweet guy and a fast learner too. Pretty soon, we became closer, and he was like my little brother. Jude, however, did not like him one bit. He was always shouting at Oliver, and even complained that he was careless and clumsy. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. We all knew that Jude was the clumsiest guy in the world. Anyway, Jude's birthday was coming up, and I wanted to buy him a new shirt, seeing as he mainly was wearing old clothes from the donation center. I wanted it to be a surprise, so I asked Oliver to come shopping with me, as Jude and Oliver were pretty much the same size. After buying a beautiful sweatshirt for Jude, Oliver took me home, and as we approached my house, I spotted Jude pacing up and down outside. Was he waiting for someone? When he saw that it was Oliver who gave me a ride, he looked angry and stormed into the house. I quickly said bye to Oliver and ran in, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The table was set with a whole bunch of delicious-looking dishes, and there were even candles and flowers. I was so confused. Had he invited a girl over for a date? How dare he? I asked him what it was for, and he said, "What day is it today? Did you forget it?" Oh, so all of this was for his birthday party? I just laughed and handed him the gift bag. He immediately looked so happy. What a child. But then he suddenly gave me a doubtful look and asked, "But what did you do in the afternoon? And with that Oliver guy?" I told him I'd asked Oliver to help me go shopping for his birthday, and then I jokingly said, "But why are you suddenly so curious? Why, you looked so annoyed upon seeing him. Are you jealous or something?" I wasn't expecting what happened next. He suddenly blushed and muttered out, "Actually, yes, I like you, Amelia. In fact, I think I'm in love with you." Whoa! What? I totally froze and didn't know what to say, but just kept looking at him and gasped. He could see I was speechless, so he waved his hands in front of me and said, "Hello, Earth to Amelia." Then he continued, "Well, Amelia, do you, have feelings for me too? Actually, never mind. It's not important. I mean, if you don't, then just forget it, and we can go back to being friends." Oh God, I had never seen him so shy before. His face went red as a tomato, and he kept scratching his head shyly. I couldn't help laughing, as, honestly, he looked so cute. So I grabbed his hands, and I couldn't stop the words from pouring out of my mouth. "Jude, honestly, I like you too." My heart was racing as I said that, and I didn't know what else to say. But suddenly he was hugging me tightly, and then the next moment we were kissing. I was over the moon. I hadn't realized how much I'd wanted that to happen. It felt amazing. From that moment on, we were inseparable. We lived together, worked together, and in our spare time we went camping, hung out in the park, and cycled to watch the sunset. He cared about me so much, and I don't think I'd ever been that happy in my life before. I didn't think life could be that great. Then, one day, while we were cleaning the house, he suddenly called me. "Amelia, look! How cute these pictures are! You drew them, right? Wow, you're gifted." I realized he was looking at my box of comic books I'd drawn, which I'd hid under the bed. I felt kinda embarrassed, and told him that I hadn't done any drawings in a while. Then he asked me why I stopped, and I told him about how it had always been my dream to go to art college, but since my mom passed away, I'd had to forget it for a while and focus on just surviving. Jude suddenly grabbed my hands and said, "Honey, let's make this dream happen. I'll help you, okay?" I was so touched and gave him the biggest hug as a response. Jude was my everything. And best of all, he always supported me. And now, he encouraged me to follow my dream too. Time went on, and everything was going amazingly. Until one day, when everything changed. Jude and I were out walking when a luxury black car stopped next to us. A random guy appeared and told us to get in the car. I freaked out and grabbed Jude's arm. What was happening? Were we being kidnapped? There was no way we were getting in the car. But suddenly the guy said, "Jude, this is an order from your parents." Jude looked shocked and said, "What do they want? They already kicked me out, so why should I come back? They want to show me how happy they are without me or something?" But still, Jude climbed in the car, and I had no choice but to follow him. On the way, there were so many questions running through my head, but I just kept quiet. A short while later, we stopped in front of a mansion. This must have been Jude's house. Whoa, I knew he came from a rich family, but not to this extent. Jude held my hand and led me inside, where a couple, probably his parents, was sitting and waiting for us. Jude immediately shouted at them, saying, "What do you want? I moved out just like you wanted, so why can't you leave me alone?" I had never seen Jude so angry before. It actually scared me. His parents looked calm, though, and they just sat there smiling, and then his mom asked him to calm down and take a seat. The next moment, a maid appeared and brought us some water, but she accidentally spilled some, and she looked mortified. She kept apologizing and wiping it up, but Jude took the tissue and started cleaning it for her. Then he politely said to her that he would come help her make the pot of tea. Jude's parents looked shocked, but somewhat content, and asked Jude to stay as they had something important to tell him. They couldn't stop grinning. It was so weird. Then they told us their news, which shocked me to my core. Jude actually was their biological son. They'd lied to him because he'd had such a bad attitude, and they just wanted to teach him a lesson and force him to grow up a bit. They were sick of doing everything for him, and thought maybe moving out for a while would inspire him to become independent and realize the true value of family and money. What? I couldn't believe what I had heard. They kicked him out to help him grow up? That almost sounded like nonsense, but I guess it had worked, right? He had changed. But how could they come up with such a crazy plan? Of course, Jude wasn't okay with this. In fact, he was furious. "What did you say?" he screamed. "Am I a joke to you or something?" His mom tried to calm him down and said, "Jude, honey, it was the only way. You were out of control, partying every night and spending all our money. We didn't know what else to do. We've been so worried about you. But son, we're so proud of you." Then his dad continued, "We've always been keeping an eye on you, son. We saw you working in that restaurant, and we are just so happy you've turned a corner and found this independence." Then she turned to me and said, "Amelia, right? Thank you so much, dear. You've looked after our son better than we ever could, and you've helped him so much." I just blushed and said, "No, it's Jude who takes care of me, actually. He's been amazing." Jude was squeezing my hand tightly, and I could see how shocked he was. Over the past 6 months, he'd been on a complete roller coaster. From being abandoned by his parents to discovering that they'd lied to him just to teach him a lesson. I couldn't believe they'd done it. But to be honest, I was grateful. Otherwise, I wouldn't have met him, and he might still be out there dating gold diggers and partying his life away. So I turned to him and said, "Babe, I know it hurts right now, but your parents did what they thought was best for you. Plus, thanks to that, you were able to realize who your true friends were, right? The ones who don't take advantage of you because of your money." It took a few moments, but then he gave me a gentle smile, and it was like he finally understood everything. He looked at his parents and said,
You guys are crazy. But if you hadn't done something so ridiculous, I'd never have met Amelia. She's made me the man I am today. Without her, and without both of you, I'd never have changed. Gosh, I miss you both. Mom, Dad, thank you.
At that, they all burst into tears and started hugging, and I just stood there, the tears pouring down my cheeks too. Watching them reunite like that was so touching, and it really made me miss my own mom. After that, we left, and as we were walking home in silence, Jude suddenly stopped and turned to me.
Amelia, thank you. Thank you for never giving up on me and for taking care of me. And now, it's my turn. I want you to go to art college and make your dreams a reality. Don't worry about money or anything. Just go make your mom and me proud.
I was speechless. I started crying again and gave him the biggest hug of my life. And guess what? We've moved into a new place downtown, and I'm about to start art college next week. Jude is working in his dad's company, and I have a feeling we're going to get engaged soon. Don't tell Jude, but I found the ring box he hid in his wardrobe, though. But I'll surely say yes, and then we can get married after I graduate. It has been a crazy journey, but I wouldn't want it to be any other way. I'm so excited for what's to come. Wish me luck! Hey, it's Haley. Did you think that the drama ended when I graduated from school? Huh, as if. Drama seems to have a way of finding me. When it came to my swing club friends, then our dreams took us in different directions. Anna and Kurt off to New York to further study the genres of music they loved, while me and Phil moved to the bright lights of LA and enrolled at college there. Being in LA was amazing, but hard work. Not only was it difficult trying to make it in the music industry, in a place where everyone else seemed to want to do the same thing, but I saw my ex-boyfriend Eric and the girl he left me for, Clara, everywhere. On billboards, in magazines, on TV, and so on. But anyway, luckily Phil managed to get us a couple of gigs in coffee shops and a couple of bars. We always gave it our best shot, even when the venue was mostly empty or full of drunks. We persevered, but it was hard work, and the money from gigs barely left me with any change after I'd paid for rent and expenses. Phil was making more money on the side by selling some of his songs, so he insisted on funding the majority of our work stuff. That made me feel so bad, but I had no other choice, so I could only try to work even harder, hoping I would soon be able to help out too, so Phil wouldn't have to carry the team by himself anymore. Then this one time, when we finished our set in this swanky lounge that we performed at every Thursday, the manager came over to us and said to me,
"Great show as usual, guys, but Haley, could you spice up your wardrobe a bit? You've been rotating the same 3 dresses for weeks now. I think our guests are finding it a little boring."
I was taken aback by this. It was so humiliating. I didn't know how to reply, so I forced a smile. Then Phil chimed in.
"Got it. Haley will be in a brand new dress next week."
This seemed to satisfy the manager, as he nodded at us, then left. I turned to Phil. "Why did you say that? We're going to record a new song next week, remember? I'm still saving money for the recording. How can I afford a dress?" Then Phil smiled and patted my shoulder.
"Don't worry, I've got it. I just received my royalty payment. Let's go to the mall, shall we?"
Then he dragged me along. I know Phil meant well, but to be honest, I felt really bad about it all. Phil was doing really well, while I was so low on funds, I couldn't even afford a new outfit without help from him. Jeez, when did I become so useless? As we walked to the mall, Phil bombarded me with questions about the type of dress I wanted. Did I want it long or short? Satin? Sequins? I couldn't feign enthusiasm, not when I felt so bummed out about it all. Sensing my mood, he asked,
"Hey, Haley, what's wrong? I said to not worry about money. I'll buy this for you."
I replied, "No, it's just, I feel so bad for you. I'm like some sort of burden weighing you down, while you obviously could do well on your own. I'll understand if you want to go solo." He was silent for a minute, but then he put his arm around me and said,
"I'm sorry, Haley. I never thought about it like that before. I don't pity you or anything. I'm helping you because you're my friend, okay? And I know you'd do the same for me."
I guess he had a point. Friends helped each other out. And of course, I would have done the same for him if the tables were turned. Then he said something I wasn't expecting to hear.
"Besides, those songs I've sold make me feel like I'm giving away a part of my soul. They're not what I want to write. They're purely to make money. Meanwhile, I collab with you because we have the same tastes. And your voice is awesome. Our time will come. I truly believe it."
Hearing his words lightened up my heart. I felt so grateful that I had Phil, and like him, I believed our work would pay off in the end. And it sure did. Our time did come, and much sooner than we expected. One late night, me and Phil were struggling to come up with the lyrics for a song in our studio. Well, to be exact, it's just a small corner in Phil's room. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was Anna, and as soon as I picked up, she screamed, "Congrats! OMG! Why didn't you tell me?" She was so loud, I held the phone away from my ear, then said, "Tell you what? Anna, calm down."
"You haven't heard? Your song, Memories. It's right here, a number 8 on iTunes chart. Check it out right now."
Are you sure it's not someone else's song? Don't prank me. You know it's not a funny joke.
"Haley, will you just go and see for yourself?"
Phil quickly searched for it on his laptop, and turns out it's real. Wow, our song really was in the charts. We all screamed at the top of our lungs. It felt so amazing. Kurt's congratulation text came right after. I knew our plays count had been increasing, but I didn't imagine our names on the iTunes chart. This was just the beginning. Soon, loads of record labels got in contact with us, including some big ones. It was all so overwhelming. Everything happened all at once. But as thrilled as we were, me and Phil had to tell each other to keep cool and really think this through, because this was a big decision that would change our lives. After a lot of deliberation, we signed with Daystar Records. It's a small, newly established record label. Dean, the CEO, is quite young, but he's a talented man who had worked for many big labels, and we believe he understood our vision the most. We'd chosen to put passion first, over the ambition for instant money and fame. And our new beginning with Daystar immediately hit the news the day we signed the contract. Both our families and our friends from Swing Club flooded us with congratulation messages. Finally! Dreams do come true. I still couldn't believe this. The first day we actually went to work at Daystar Records as their artists, I kid you not, I literally skipped all the way there. Dean was waiting at the door to greet us. Then he showed us around and introduced us to everyone. Apart from different practice rooms, we were also given a small studio of our own. Now Phil had a place for his equipment and to properly produce his songs. Dean even got us some performance spots on a couple of TV shows and organized some interviews. These really helped our fan base to increase, and people started to recognize us in the street. It was so crazy. I was just a normal girl with a love of music. And now I had actual fans. Once, I was in the vocal booth practicing my lines when I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to see a member of staff was holding a huge bouquet of purple peonies, my favorite flower. I opened the card. "Haley, like these flowers, you've bloomed. Please never forget how enchanting your voice is, and never let go of your dreams. I know you'll reach the top. I believe in you." I flipped the card over, but there was no name on it. Maybe they were from my mom, and she'd forgotten to put her name on them? Or maybe they were from a fan. Either way, I was deeply touched. I kept the card in my purse as a reminder to keep moving forward, for myself and for the people who were supporting and believing in me. The next few months whizzed by, and I was happy with where my life was going in the City of Angels. There was one thing bugging me, though. It was probably nothing, but Dean was making me a little on the uncomfortable side. It was small things, really, such as, if he knew I was in the practice room, he'd bring me coffee. And on the days I left work late, he'd text me asking if I got home okay. He even suggested getting a folding bed for the studio, so I could stay there if I wanted to. Yeah, I know, he was probably just being nice, but he's a married man. I just see him as a big brother. I felt really awkward and uncomfortable every time he acted like this around me. I didn't want to cross any line, so I thought it best to distance myself from him as much as possible. But then there was this album release party for an A-list singer, and Dean wanted me and Phil to tag along. This was huge! I knew a lot of other celebrities would be there, and this would be a great chance for us to expand our circle in the industry. I jumped in excitement and took Phil's arm. "Oh my God, we have to—" Then Phil spoke up to Dean.
"I think I'll pass. You should take Haley with you. I'm not into that kind of noisy party. Sorry. I'd rather go finish this song I'm working on. I'll send you the demo soon."
Then Dean replied,
"I understand. I'm not too keen on these parties either, but it works for me, you know."
Then he turned to me.
"I'll pick you up from here. Tomorrow at 8, okay?"
I was taken aback. No way! I wouldn't go if Phil didn't. I mean, it would be so awkward if just me and Dean went there. So I quickly replied, I don't think I can go either, as I just remembered I have an appointment tomorrow. I'll join you next time." I forced a smile. Dean stared at me for a second, with confusion in his eyes, before he said,
"Oh, that's such a pity. This could be a great chance for you guys. Tell me if you change your mind, okay?"
Then he left. Well, yeah, of course I had 0 appointments, and I was bummed out at missing the party, but I didn't feel comfortable around Dean. And, there probably will be another chance soon. But then later that day, when I was about to go home, I heard someone calling me from behind.
"Haley, wait up! I have something to tell you."
Oh no, that sounded like Dean. Gosh, what did we have to talk about? Hey, it's Haley. So, my dreams of becoming a big star were finally starting to come true. Me and Phil had just performed at the Blue Moon Festival, and the crowd loved us. I was buzzing from the performance when Eric appeared. Ugh! He was the last person I wanted to talk to, but I didn't want Phil and him to end up fighting, so with reluctance, I agreed to hear Eric out. He smiled at me and said,
"Haley, it's so good to see you. You look fantastic."
I grumbled, "Just cut to the chase. I don't have time." He then continued,
"I know it must have been hard for you. I'm sorry for that."
I folded my arms and rolled my eyes. I was so mad. It's been over a year, and he still has never had the decency to explain to me what went wrong between us. We didn't even have a proper breakup. He just went off with that Clara girl. I couldn't take it anymore, so I blurted out, "Just stop! I don't need this. Instead, why don't you just tell me why you cheated on me?" Eric fell silent and just stared at the ground. I let out a sigh and continued, "See? You can't even excuse yourself. Eric, you're nothing more than a coward, and you don't deserve me." Then I left him standing there alone and went to the green room. Upon seeing me walking through the door, Phil hurried over to me and asked if I was okay. I forced a smile and told him everything was fine. I sat down in the corner of the room and tried to hold back my tears. I guess I wasn't fine after all. Instead, seeing Eric had restirred all of my feelings and emotions toward him. Then a staff member appeared in front of me with a huge bouquet of purple peonies. She told me that they'd been sent in for me. So I thanked her and eagerly read the note. But just like the last bunch that I'd received at the studio, there was no name on the card. Just a message. This one read, "Haley, reach for the skies and continue to dazzle like the true star you are." Suddenly, Eric popped into my mind. Could he be the one who sent these flowers? I mean, except for my family, only he knew that purple peonies were my favorite. And why here? Why now? This bouquet of peonies appeared again when Eric was around, but that would make no sense. We're over, and he'd even cheated on me with Clara, who he was still with. Ugh, my mind was messing with me. On the journey home, I stared out of the window and daydreamed about Eric, the flowers, and why he just stood there in silence. I knew I shouldn't waste my time with him, as I had better things to do, but it was so hard. Following on from the success of the festival, Phil and I were mentioned online, alongside other famous artists. It was kinda cool, but also kinda awkward seeing our faces on the internet. I guess it'd take some getting used to. Phil suggested we should take advantage of this publicity and start working on our first album right away. He also thought it'd be a good idea for me to input my creativity into it by having a go at writing songs. I'd never written a song before, so I was unsure. Phil was the composer, not me. But then Phil said something that made me change my mind. "Haley, I know you're still upset about everything that happened with Eric, so why don't you try to channel that hurt into your music? The most moving songs come from the heart." Phil was right. I'd been bottling up my emotions for so long, maybe it was time I let them out. So, we started working on the album. We didn't want to rush it, so the plan was to release a few singles to keep the fans interested and eager for more, while we spent the next year working on it. Then one day, Swing Club contacted us and asked us to perform at their 20th anniversary party. This was so exciting. I owed so much to Swing Club. They also informed us that Eric had agreed to come too, and that he was bringing Clara along. Well, I guess it was inevitable. On the plus side, Anna and Kurt told me they were going. Yay! It would be awesome to see them. Being back at my old school was weird, but in a good way. Suddenly, I was hit with all those memories. The last time I was here, I was just a teenager with these crazy big dreams of becoming a singer. And now look at me. My dreams had finally come true. Then we walked into the Swing Club rehearsal room. Wow, it hadn't changed at all. I instantly had this warm feeling. It felt like I was home. I saw all the younger students had gathered around Eric and Clara and were asking for their autographs. Then I spotted some of my former classmates. They were standing at the other end of the room and giving Eric and Clara dirty looks, as they were the ones who knew exactly what went on between me and Eric back then. Phil and I went over to them, and as soon as they saw us, the girls, Anna among them, screamed with joy and immediately ran towards us, and we all did a big group hug. Kurt and the boys were standing behind and greeted us too. It was so great to see them all again. Turns out, some goofy love from my friends was just what I needed. Eric spotted us and walked over with a huge smile on his face. Kurt then said out loud, "Let's stand somewhere else, guys. There's a strong scent of cheater around here. Makes me want to puke." Then he walked off, and everyone followed. Not knowing what to do, I just stood there, staring at Eric. To be honest, I felt a little bit bad for him. Anna seemed to figure out what I was thinking, as she dragged me along and said, "Let's go, Haley. This jerk's only getting what he deserves." I knew my friends meant well, but I didn't mean to make anyone pick sides. Okay, I knew what Eric did to me wasn't great. Still, I didn't want to see him being treated like this. Anyway, I knew I couldn't think like this now, as I had a performance to prepare for. The anniversary concert was amazing. It felt so good being back on the stage in the place where it all began. Afterward, I went outside and sat down on a bench in the garden to catch some fresh air. It was a bit chilly, and I started shivering. Suddenly, I felt someone put a jacket over my shoulders and say, "You never know how to take care of yourself, huh?" I turned around and saw that it was Eric. Our eyes met, and it felt awkward. I didn't want anything to do with him anymore, so I gave him back his jacket and walked past him. But suddenly, he grabbed my arm and said, "Please wait. Can we talk for a minute?" I replied, "There's nothing to talk about." He was about to say something when suddenly Clara showed up and said, "Well, well, what do we have here? If you keep clinging on to her like that, others might think you're having an affair with her." I was startled and quickly yanked my arm away, then stepped back. Clara continued, "That's better now. You know, Haley, he has a girlfriend, so you shouldn't be so flirty." Eric grabbed my hand and tried dragging me away. Ugh, all these physical contacts were giving me mixed feelings. Why couldn't he and his annoying girlfriend just leave me alone? Then luckily, Phil showed up and said, "Hey, jerk, let her go!" Eric glared angrily back at Phil and said, "Excuse me, but who are you to say that?" Then Phil pulled me back to his side, and the two of them had a stare-off. Clara, who was clearly annoyed that no one was paying her any attention, looked at Eric and said in an ironic voice, "Babe, they're superstars now. We shouldn't mess with them." And then she tried to lock arms with him, but Eric just pushed her away. That made her even more frustrated. So she turned to me and Phil and continued, "Congratulations on your big success. You both worked hard." Or maybe it was just Phil. I mean, without his songs, you'd be nothing. Irritated, I mumbled, "Watch your mouth, Clara." But she didn't care and turned to Phil saying, "Oh, Phil, you should have let me sing your songs. I bet they would have been #1 on Billboard, or even won Song of the Year. But no, you've wasted them on her. What a pity." Oh God, I hated her. Why did she always have to act like such a diva? I was going to give her a piece of my mind when suddenly Eric spoke up.
"Don't be ridiculous. Haley is really talented, and her voice skills are perfect."
Then Phil added,
"Haley is beginning to compose some pretty awesome songs. Also, her voice complements my music perfectly, while you two only get attention because of your dating rumors."
Well, Phil's last comment left Eric and Clara speechless. Then Phil led me inside. Clara just flipped her hair and said, "Let's go, babe," and walked away. But Eric didn't follow her. It was all so confusing. Why had he stood up for me against Clara? She was his girlfriend, right? So why would he treat her like that in front of us? Something was up, definitely. But I had no time to let it bother my mind. It's best to stay away from them, I guessed. The next day, Phil and I headed back to LA to continue our work. For months, Dean had been talking about hosting a mini show for us, and finally the plan was coming together. And the show would be called Haley and Phil, Our Journey Begins. It was exciting, as this was our first mini show ever. We rehearsed day and night for it, hoping to bring flawless performances to our fans. The day of the mini show arrived swiftly, and everything was going great as planned. But then, there was a small problem. There was nobody else backstage to help me zip my dress. Oh no, this was really urgent. I had to get on stage right now. Then Dean appeared to see where I was, so I awkwardly asked him for help. As he zipped up my dress, a camera flashed. What was that? Did somebody just secretly take a picture of me? I turned to Dean and gave him an anxious look. Then he ran outside to see who it was. But the corridor was empty. Hi, it's me, Haley again. So, a chance encounter at an audition meant that I reconnected with Eric, and after he explained that his relationship with Claire was fake, we got back together. Things were going great, but then some mean, fake rumors about me started, and my anti-fan base began to grow. It was okay though, because I had Eric, and being with him made me feel like the luckiest girl in the world. He went out of his way to cheer me up by surprising me with cute gifts and cooking for me. It was hard keeping our relationship a secret. I really wanted to go public with him so we could be seen together like a normal couple. For our anniversary, Eric called me up and told me that he had a surprise for me. He told me to dress up and come outside as he was waiting for me. I asked him where he was taking me, but he just laughed and said,
"Babe, just come down quickly and I'll let you know."
I got ready and rushed out to his car. There he was, dressed all smartly and looking so cute. He smiled at me and said,
"I wanted to take you out, so I've booked a private cinema room for us. It's out of the city center, so we won't be spotted."
I hugged him in excitement. I hadn't gone to the cinema since forever. And with Eric? Yay! This would be really awesome. I know. I had the sweetest, most romantic boyfriend ever. However, It wasn't long before my bubble burst. We arrived at the cinema to paparazzi everywhere. How could this be? On seeing our car, they immediately turned their cameras to us and went into a flashing frenzy. We had no choice but to cancel the date and go back home. Such a bummer. And that was scary too. How had they found out about our plan? Back at my place, we ordered pizza and watched a romantic movie. As good as it was spending time with Eric, I couldn't shake my sadness away. On sensing my mood, he patted my head and comforted me that everything would be okay, and we could date out next time. The next day, when I woke up and surfed Twitter, as expected, the news about me and Eric's relationship was everywhere. I was made to be the villain who'd gotten in the way of Eric and Clara's dreamy love story. I scanned over some of the negative comments about me. One said, "Poor Haley, beautiful voice, but a vile boyfriend thief." And another said, "Is Eric blind? Clara's so much prettier than her. I guess he must like mean girls." The whole thing sucked, and I felt dreadful. I wasn't a boyfriend stealer, nor was I a rude or horrible person. Worse still, some comments made out I was two-timing Phil with Eric. Ugh! Phil and I were just friends. Now I was famous, my private life wasn't so private anymore. The world felt like they owned me and could therefore say whatever hurtful and untrue things they wanted to. It seemed the truth didn't matter, not when lies made stories. Luckily, my loyal fans were still by my side to protect and comfort me. "Haley, I'll always believe you. Haley, don't worry. We will always love you." And so on. These messages were so sweet, and they supported me a lot. Right, I just needed to focus on working and composing songs for my next album. My talent and effort would be the best comeback to all the haters. Indeed, after a few weeks, everything settled down. However, it wasn't long before another storm came. One night, I was at a party to celebrate the new product launch of the cosmetic brand I represent. Of course, there were a bunch of celebs and paparazzi at the party. Even Eric attended. Because of the recent rumors, we just smiled and then chatted with other guests. I also saw Clara. She was talking to Jane, Dean's wife. On seeing me, Clara just smirked and looked away. But whatever, she could be that way if she wanted. While I was talking to the brand representative, I saw Jane coming over to me with a glass of wine in her hand. I thought she wanted to say hi to me or something, so I turned and smiled at her. But then I realized that she looked quite angry. She pulled out a photo and yelled at me. "Say it! What happened between you and my husband?" Confused, I looked at the photo. Oh no, it was the one where Dean was zipping up my dress at the mini show. It was completely innocent. But the picture made us both look so guilty. "Who gave you this pic? It's not what you think. He just helped me." Without letting me finish my sentence, she shouted angrily. "How dare you seduce my husband? Aren't you in a relationship with Eric? Or Phil or something? It seems that you dare to do everything to be famous, right?" I tried explaining it to her, but she was too angry to listen. I asked her to go somewhere else more private to talk, as there were many people here. But this made her more furious, and she yelled at me that I was the third wheel who stole her husband. We immediately caught the attention of everyone at the party. They gathered around us and kept pointing at us and whispering. She glared at me as she said, "It's time girls like you were taught a lesson." I saw that she was about to splash her wine over me, so I quickly covered my face with my hands. But at that point, someone appeared in front of me. I looked up and saw Eric with a wine-soaked face. Oh no! I was confused and didn't know what to do next. This was out of control. Then Clara appeared, grabbed Jane's hand, and told her to calm down and think about how this would affect Dean's career. They both left after that. I grabbed a napkin and tried to wipe Eric's face, but he shrugged me away and told me to go home before things worsened. I hesitated a bit, but I knew he was right. This night was a disaster. Feeling so confused and upset, I went to the studio instead of coming back home. It was late, so there was no one there. I curled up on the couch and thought about things. The entertainment industry was so harsh. I'd just gained a bit of popularity, but a series of false scandals had already come up. After a while, I decided to text Eric. I felt really guilty about what had happened tonight and wanted to say sorry to him. But there was no reply. Maybe he was busy or something, I thought. I decided to wait for him to call me back. I must have fallen asleep as I woke up to Phil's voice.
Haley? What are you doing here? Are you okay? You didn't answer my calls.
I looked at my phone and saw dozens of missed calls and texts from Dean and Phil, but none from Eric. Then Dean also arrived and asked me to tell him everything that had happened last night. Afterward, he said that he'd talk to Jane and explain what really happened. And of course, the scandal had made the headlines. However, Dean told me not to worry and that he would find out who took that photo and make everything clear. Then, Dean's phone rang. It was the cosmetic brand from last night. Apparently, my scandals negatively had affected their brand image, and customers were threatening to boycott their products, so they were canceling all association with me and were demanding compensation. Whoa, I didn't expect things to have grown this bad, this quickly. So I searched social media and saw that the hashtag about me, Haley the Third Wheel, was trending at number 1, along with loads of negative comments branding me a man-stealer and saying that they'd never listen to my music again. My world collapsed. I felt like I would never prove myself innocent. The cosmetic brand was the first of many. Next, TV shows, concerts, and magazines all phoned in canceling. I felt like I was going crazy. The whole world seemed to be turning its back on me. Daystar fell into a crisis, to say the least. However, Dean and Phil still remained on my side and said that they would make everything clear and prove me innocent. The following days, I locked myself in my room and didn't want to meet anyone. While I was lying on my bed, the phone rang, and thinking that it was Eric, I immediately answered it. Turns out, it was the manager of another entertainment company. He said,
"Move to my company. I'm sure that I can make you more famous if you become my little lover."
OMG! I couldn't believe it. I hung up angrily without saying anything. How rude he was! I burst into tears. Everything was completely beyond my stamina. My friends and family constantly called and texted me to check if I was okay. They were really kind, but I still felt sad and lonely, as there was still no news from Eric. I'd not heard as much as a word from him since the party, even though I'd texted and called him hundreds of times. It was just like 3 years ago when I was in trouble. He was nowhere to be found. The sad memories of the past few years seemed to come to life again. Had Kurt been right all along? Had Eric come back to me just for fame, not for love? So now, when my scandals were everywhere, he immediately disappeared in order not to be involved. I didn't want to believe it, but how could I think otherwise? Anna and Kurt were in a different state, but they still rushed to LA to take care of me. Meanwhile, my so-called boyfriend who lived in the same city as me couldn't be any less bothered. I was so grateful to have Anna and Kurt there, so I told them everything that had happened between me and Eric. Anna was furious and said that Eric was just a psychopath who wanted to take advantage of my love. I sighed. Was she right? Did he just want to play with my feelings? Whatever. All of this had been too much for me. I just wanted to throw it all away and catch a break from this dramatic life, now that my friends were all here. Some days later, one night, when Anna and I were watching a film together, The phone rang. Someone said that Kurt was hospitalized because he got in a fight or something. Anna and I immediately rushed to the hospital, which was swarming with paparazzi. Huh? What was this about? Why were they here? I didn't know what was going on, but that surely couldn't be a good sign.